Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of our Office of Housing Counseling Community Conference. You are here for our session on Looking Ahead with OHC, a focus on technology and data reporting. I believe all of you are pros now on our CVent conference networking application, but just wanted to share a few reminders for today's session. You can use the live Q&A functionality within CVent to ask questions. Time permitting, we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the session. And don't forget, you also are able to view the schedule, any sessions that you also missed, and connect with our conference partners through CVent and post any questions you might also have to the community boards after the session. Our speakers today are me, Lindsay Burns, Lead Housing Counseling Specialist with ICF, David Valdez, Senior Housing Program Specialist with the Office of Housing Counseling, Linda Davis-Demis, Vice President of Housing with Balance, David Young, Director of Capacity Building for Housing Action, Illinois. For our session today, obviously, technology and data reporting is a large topic. So we wanted to think of a way to present it to you all and keep up to date and on top of what's most relevant and what the Office of Housing Counseling wanted to feature for today's conversation. So we're going to begin with our first segment on what's happening now with data and reporting. I'll provide an overview of the state of HUD 9902 housing counseling activity reporting and a demonstration of our data displays on the 9902 data. We'll then move into what's new, what folks want to be aware of in terms of opportunities to improve reportable activity and outcomes for housing counseling. And we'll wrap up with a segment on what's coming up next. We know there's always something new on the horizon and coming next with technologies. So we'll hear about some more robust data sets to integrate technology and grow our impact. And as I said, time permitting, we will open up at the end for some Q&A. We know all of your questions are probably burning and coming through, so don't forget to also post them in the community boards in case you don't get the answers you're looking for today. So as I said, I'll start us off with orienting us, level setting the conversation to where we are now with the state of HUD 9902 housing counseling activity reporting. In order to understand where we're going, what's new, and what we need to be thinking about in our work every day, it's helpful to know where are we now and how can you get a handle on what does it look like, what is the data showing us, and what is available to you as an agency to understand the reporting resources. So we wanted to start off with an orientation on what the data is showing us as of most recently the quarter available, and show you our data displays tool on the HUD Exchange that you can use as an organization to benchmark your agency. We know this is just the beginning of the conversation, and there will be additional technical assistance and tools coming to evaluate barriers to reporting and undercounting activity. We want your feedback. And so what we share with you today is a great opportunity to get a sense of what we're working on and where you might need more support. As you can see as a snapshot, as of FY 2024 quarter 2, with the most recent data we have from July, there have been a total of 487,802 households served this fiscal year. That's going back to October 1st, 2023. That breakdown is primarily one-on-one counseling with 300,036 sessions and group education at 187,766 sessions. So where is this data coming from, and how does your agency's data factor into it? We at ICF have been supporting the Office of Housing Counseling with providing some tools on 9902 reporting and ensuring all information is reported timely and accurately as possible, knowing that you have a lot to do in your day-to-day work. We have developed what we call the Housing Counseling Program Outcome Data Displays. You can find this page on the HUD Housing Counseling Program page of the HUD Exchange. where you can also find information on our Housing Counseling 9902 online toolkit that gives you tips on understanding the 9902, information about CMS guidance, and using HCS to report your information. What the data displays does is, what we really hope it does, is help you understand what agencies are looking at, what HUD is looking at, and what our regulators and our legislators are looking at when they're trying to understand the impact of the program and the work that you're doing to help families across the country. This information is available to anybody who visits the HUD Exchange. And I'll walk you through now some of the ways that you can navigate the data displays that are available, and some ideas on how you might be able to use this information in your agency. So with our housing counseling program outcome data displays, we have data that's available starting with fiscal year 2022 through the present only. As you all may recall, the HUD 9902 form was last updated in fiscal year 2022. So the available data for previous years can be found also in the archived data displays page. But when you navigate to this page, you can view all of the 9902 data submitted from FY 2022 through to the present. We usually update this information as quickly as possible after you've done your quarterly reporting each quarter, and you can always tell in the upper right-hand corner of the data displays when it was last updated. You can navigate the data displays a few different ways. You can scroll through to see each of the sections of the 9902 at an aggregate level, or you can click through to each of the sections using these bars at the top. Starting at the top, we provide you an overview of the scope of services and the total households served, and the breakdown of the types of group education and one-on-one counseling that were provided. As you may know by now, the HUD 902 data is always reported cumulatively. So this quarter for FY 2024, quarter two, which is the default that you'd see when you sign in and look at the data displays, includes all of the data going back to October 1st, 2023. So if you are looking to see some of the data that's available for a full fiscal year, you would want to go to this drop down for fiscal quarter and look at quarter four for that fiscal year. For example, I'll pull up quarter four, FY 2023 quarter four data. So now you can see as of the end of FY 2023, we had 969,963 households served. You can also play around with how the data is displayed as a total or a percentage. I'll get to this in a moment, but you can filter the data displays based on the state where you're working, or you can select multiple states if you want to look at a particular HUD region, for example, which we've heard has been helpful for folks who are looking at their data and making funding requests and trying to benchmark and plan for how they're going to serve the needs in their community. As we scroll through, you can also visualize households served by state by clicking on this map. As you highlight over each of the states, you'll see the number of households served, and you can also see the color-coded map to show where all of the housing activity is taking place. You can filter this to look at just group education or one-on-one counseling, and you can also filter this information for the quarter that you want to look at in particular. The same information is available for each of the sections of the 9902 as you proceed through, as I mentioned, including race and ethnicity, income level. And when you get down to this section, the outcome of services, we have a really cool infographic that you can scroll through horizontally to view each of the 9902 section 10 data points at an aggregate level based on the quarter that you filtered. So for example, here you can see that we had close to 178,000 households that received one-on-one counseling and group education services in FY 2023. As you scroll through this, we've heard from folks that this is a really interesting and fun way to be able to showcase the work of housing counseling to funders and again to your leadership and in public settings. So you can always link to this and pull this up, take screenshots of it, and zoom in on any of the particular data points that you're looking at. And again, as you scroll through, as I mentioned, you can also look at your state profiles. When you want to look at a particular state profile, if you click on that state, that will automatically filter to the information for that particular state. You can select a different state from the drop down here if you want to zoom in on different states or compare. And you'll be able to see all of the same exact 9902 data that from the scope of services, race and ethnicity, income level, and counseling purpose and location, all based on that state level information. We have on our panel today David Young at Housing Action Illinois. We've heard from David a little bit about how his agency is using the data displays in their local work in Illinois. So David, do you mind sharing a little bit about what you've done using the 902 data displays with your work?
Sure, Lindsay, happy to. Good morning, everyone. We have used the data displays pretty regularly. The majority of our sub-grantees are based in Illinois. So we've been able to look at the Illinois data to better understand what's happening in the state of Illinois and what types of resources we should be deploying to meet client needs. It's also been very helpful to look at the national data, just to have a better understanding of what is happening, what services people are looking for, so that again, we as an industry have the ability of making sure that our counselors have the right training so that they can provide the services to consumers that they're looking for.
Thank you, David. I always want folks to hear from a housing counseling agency directly. So really, this is where we wanted to start the conversation today in order for us to talk about what it is that's important and what HUD is looking at in terms of counseling data activity and reporting. We want you to know how we see where we stand today and what we're able to see and understand from the information that we have available to us. And as David mentioned, for an individual agency, this is helpful in your work in supporting and increasing support for your services. But we also know at the federal level, this is the type of information that gets looked at to determine how much funding is available for the program and and a big part of why we want to be able to support you all in figuring out how to get this data to a place where it really truly demonstrates all the great work that you all are doing, understanding the limitations in your day-to-day with how much work you have to do to make reporting and the technology that you're using as seamless as possible. It's an ongoing effort, but that's what we're here to support you with. So as I transition to the next segment of our presentation today, I want to introduce David Valdez again to speak to us about one of those areas that HUD has been focusing on in terms of opportunities to improve reportable activity and outcomes for counseling. So David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. And so OHC's goal in the coming years is to increase the number of clients served and those reported out. And before we begin this discussion, I think it could use a little bit of helpful framing. So traditionally, housing counseling agencies have narrowly interpreted what constitutes counseling. And I think this has led to some agencies excluding or overlooking certain activity that doesn't align with conventional notions of counseling. Recognize that this ambiguity regarding what type of activities fall within the scope of counseling has made agencies a bit reluctant or wary of recognizing certain individuals as clients when, in fact, they could be counted. And we understand that there's a fear sort of the possibility of erroneous reporting. And I'm here to allay those fears and those concerns. Assistance that meets all the criteria that's outlined in the definition of counseling, which means intake, financial and housing affordability analysis, a follow-up, these are going to fall within the scope of counseling and can be rightfully regarded as counseling. I do think as well that some practices and standards over the years, there's been some accretion in terms of adoption of policies that may be more stringent than HUD zone standards. And so again, I'm here to remind everyone what our baseline HUD regulatory and handbook standards are, and in the hopes that this will increase reporting. So what we're looking at here is one attempt to address this issue. And so if you were to compare the last handbook language regarding counseling services with what you're looking at on the screen, it is different. And it's different in a very significant way. In the new handbook, chapter 3-5, we go a little further in explaining what constitutes a financial and housing affordability analysis. And what we say is that we recognize that there's going to be circumstances where a budget might not be appropriate. And this recognition, we hope will increase the number of clients reported so that it sort of allays those concerns of, not completing the whole part of the financial analysis. And I'll go over in a bit some myths and some facts, but really what's required of you, bottom line, in these circumstances when a budget may not be appropriate, is to just properly notate in the client file why that's the case. And so we have some myths and some facts. I think that it's important that everyone understands that though financial and housing affordability analysis is a necessary prong of the housing counseling, and it is always required, a budget is not. And so in some circumstances, as I described, and as I'll go into further, they may not be appropriate. And I really want to focus in on this concept of appropriate for the circumstances, because that is indeed the test we're working with here. And so there are going to be situations where a budget may not be appropriate, particularly in the context of homelessness counseling, rental counseling. And again, what your obligation is as a counselor and as a housing counseling agency is to maintain a file where if we were to go, a third-party reviewer like HUD were to go in to look at your files, that we would be able to tell from that file the reason why there's not a budget, and that you actually conducted the financial and housing affordability analysis. And the key here is that it is an analysis, and so it's not the outcome, right? Most of the time, the outcome will be a budget, and that's how a financial and housing affordability analysis will be completed. But let's look at some examples of where this might not be the case. So there are situations, as I've noted several times, where a budget's not going to be appropriate. There are 3 circumstances that we outlined in the housing counseling handbook. And I'll take this opportunity to say that the handbook was the vehicle that we chose, the policy vehicle we chose to contain this new information, because this is a non-exhaustive list. We recognize that we could not possibly come up with all the combinations and permutations of situations out there that would require, or rather would fall outside of the requirement, right? And so what we have here are 3 circumstances that we felt were pretty common. And what prompted this actually was disaster recovery assistance, and a question that we posed to our general counsel regarding this issue. And so we recognize, you can imagine a circumstance where there's been a hurricane or a flood event, and important documents are ruined in the natural disaster. And our focus and your focus as housing counselors is to rectify the situation at hand and to provide, assistance that's more direct and appropriate for the moment. And so sometimes this looks like referring to other social service agencies, other government agencies like FEMA, et cetera. But I think the point here is that we do recognize that in those situations, a lot of times the client is not going to have the necessary documents so that you can create a budget, or it may not be just appropriate for the circumstance. Similarly, there are situations in the rental counseling realm where clients may be seeking advice about issues that are not related to money. So they may have a problem with repairs or the need for an exterminator or something like that. And the issue is not about money. The client may be caught up completely on their rent. They've never been late. And in those circumstances, the client is presenting to you with a housing problem that has nothing to do with budgeting. And so we recognize that in those circumstances, we may not need a budget to complete that financial and housing affordability analysis. You would note in the client file exactly what I just articulated. And similarly, individuals experiencing homelessness or unhoused, they may have no income sources. They may not have copies of bills or access to a cell phone to share their account information or anything like that. And so in these types of circumstances, we just want to point out that a budget may not be appropriate, and we recognize that. And so you can still complete that housing and affordability analysis prong of the housing counseling test, if you will, by just articulating in the client file why it wasn't necessary to create a budget. And we hope that that this practice and this information will give you greater confidence when reporting, and so that we can increase client counts and make sure that we're capturing the clients that you're already serving. I think that's the most important piece here. There are many clients that you may be serving that you don't quite think meet the threshold of counseling, but I urge you to reconsider in light of this new information. And with that, I'll pass it on to Linda. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, David. And good morning, everybody. So a great segue to what David was talking about is the opportunity to really maximize and report all of that activity. And to do that, you need a client management system. So there's a really amazing and helpful guide out there that Housing Action Illinois created that you can find on the HUD Exchange. And it gives you an overview of multiple CMS systems. The key things that I think really come in handy are, first and foremost, 9902 reporting. So the ease with which you can submit your report, make edits, make sure that you're validating your profile, things that ironically are the little things that end up coming up during performance reviews that sometimes get forgotten. The other thing is, what capabilities do they offer? Just like organizations, we come in all shapes and sizes, so do the client management systems. So looking at ones that perhaps may have a client portal that you could utilize, especially if you're serving clients from multiple areas, multiple MSAs, and you want to be able to utilize a client portal for them to be able to do intake. Sharing docs is someone that compliance is very dear and near to my heart. Being able to store documents and making sure that everything stays with that record, which is the client file, is really going to be key. And I think COVID, one of the positive things of COVID, if you can look at it that way, is that it really pushed everyone to look at electronic storage and electronic processing of client information in a very different aspect or different view than we had done previously. So sharing docs, as I mentioned, and then an important thing that I think oftentimes gets overlooked is the client action plan, right? So we spend all this time as counselors developing the client action plan, but you want to make it to where it's user-friendly, that they can read it, they understand what their next steps are very clearly. They're not having to dig through a mountain of information that may not necessarily pertain to them. So trying to really customize and tailor that to the client is going to be key. So in addition to your client management systems, there are a lot of other tools out there. And I think one of the keys to the work that we do is being able to really be as efficient as possible, right? Work smarter, not necessarily harder. And technology feeds a lot into that. And so today we see artificial intelligence coming in many different ways into the work that we do. There are things that agencies we've seen utilize ChatGPT, or Perplexity, different tools such as this. I would always encourage folks to make sure that you are looking at the security features as well, because a lot of these platforms are open, but they're really useful. I mean, we've looked at taking some of the curriculum that we've developed and putting it and just adjusting how some of the language is is displayed has really been phenomenal, and it's amazing to see what it does. In addition to those features, for us at Balance, one of the things that we found is we had a funder that really wanted regular wet signatures. And during COVID, that was virtually impossible. And so we had to look at several different tools. We already used electronic forms quite a bit, but FormStack was one that we utilized that allowed the client to be able to sign from their phone, from their computer, their iPad, whatever they may have. And it really helped, I would say, streamline that process for us, but it also gave us a record. So from a compliance standpoint, it was beautiful. And there are lots of different tools like this, right? You can find different things that fit your agency's budget. Some tools are free, some of them do come with an additional cost. And I would just make sure that you always check security features to make sure that you have ownership of the documentation. And then another key feature that I do want to highlight that we use quite a bit, and I don't think we had an idea of how much we were going to utilize it when we first incorporated it, is a tool such as Smartsheets, right? So we are an intermediary. We have multiple subs that report to us for different types of grants. And so we utilize this to streamline the reporting process. And from our subs perspective, like, this has definitely been a positive. They're not having to fill out a bunch of Excel forms. They can easily do this, submit it with a link. We can track it. They can make edits. We can see when things were edited as well. And it's really been helpful for us to be able to handle such a large number of data. And it's really helped us also be able to do some data analytics on it. So I would say there's lots of tools out there. Credit Expert Essentials can help you from credit, giving you tips on how to reduce or improve a credit score or reduce a debt load. And then, you know, some CMSs have also incorporated artificial intelligence. Housing Action Illinois and Balance, we both use the same CMS, ironically, and it has an AI feature built into it that can help with client action plans, but also help finding resources and things of that nature. So there's lots of tools available that can assist. You just really have to take the time to look at what works for your organization and what works for your budget. But I would strongly encourage organizations to consider this as a step to work a little bit more efficiently and reduce some of that burden for all of us, because we definitely have a lot to do. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to David Young. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda, and thank you for the shout out regarding the CMS guide. We hope that that has been a valuable tool for the industry. Linda mentioned about client management systems, and of course, the client management systems collect data, and then they use that data to show us our impacts and our outcomes. And something that we've wanted to do for a number of years now is to be able to collect significant more data, so that we can better show what our impacts and outcomes are and the success that we're having as an industry. And many years ago, we began a project that was started by the National Housing Resource Center to create a housing counseling data set, which would allow us to collect more information and show more impacts and outcomes. And a couple of years into starting that process, we started working with the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization, or MISMO, in order to incorporate our data set into the larger MISMO reference model. And it's important to work with MISMO because MISMO provides the language that many other providers, including loan origination systems and mortgage servicing systems, are using to communicate to each other. So by looking to align our data set with MISMO, it means that we can facilitate better communication across all of those systems. So our client management systems, the loan origination systems, and the servicing systems. So we're very excited about that. And I am especially excited to let this group know that we have created our data set. It has a total of 272 fields, and 50 of those fields are unique to us and are being added or are additions to the MISMO reference model. And we had a long process of putting all of those things together and then submitting those to MISMO's information management and architecture work group. And the initial 50 elements that we would like to add to the reference model have been approved as of yesterday, or 2 days ago, excuse me, as of September 17th. So we're really excited that that's happened. Why this is significant is because MISMO tends to think about clients from a life of loan perspective. So someone that applies for a mortgage, gets their mortgage, pays their mortgage, and then the mortgage is paid off and sunsets. But we in the housing counseling industry think about mortgages from much earlier than the time of application. So being able to get these additional 50 data points, these data elements into the MISMO reference model, which really take place long before there's a client filling out an application is very, very valuable. And it also, I think, helps to reorient some of the other partners that we work with originators, for example, to thinking about clients long before the mortgage application. So what are all of these things going to do for us? As I mentioned earlier, it's going to mean that we will be able to collect a lot more data on the impact and the outcomes that we are having. And we'll be able to better show to prospective funders the value proposition that the housing counseling industry brings to the table. Another exciting thing, which has really driven my interest in this whole thing, is that we as housing counseling professionals will be able to assemble packages on behalf of our pre-purchase clients that eventually we will be able to submit directly on their behalf to an originator. And what's exciting about that is it means that all of this information that we've collected on behalf of clients, when the client applies currently for a mortgage, they're required to basically resubmit all of that same information to an originator. By using MISMO and being able to speak the same language and making sure we have all the correct security protocols, we will be able to submit that information on behalf of the client directly to the origination system, which will speed up the application process and help more clients to get approved. So, you know, time is money, and anywhere where we can help reduce the time it takes to process saves money. And that increases our value proposition as an industry. Another place where it's very exciting is on the servicing side. So after someone has a mortgage, if they run into trouble where they're late on their mortgage or there's potentially a default, by having the information on the servicing side, who provided, what agency provided the housing counseling services, then that consumer can be sent back, or the housing counseling agency can be alerted that the consumer, the mortgage holder, is late, which means that we can reach in and we can triage and intervene and hopefully help to resolve any situations before it goes into further default or foreclosure. And all of that is going to be possible because what we've been doing in MISMO. And it also which I think is an extremely important thing, puts us on the same level with everybody else. I think everyone here on the housing counseling side knows that sometimes we haven't seen the same value for the work that we do on the origination side or the realtor side. And by having this data set, by putting these impacts in place, by being able to utilize these same systems, we can show that value proposition and get the respect that we deserve for all the work that we've been doing. So you're going to start to see these changes in your client management systems over the next year, where the developers are going to start to integrate these data points. We expect for the Office of Housing Counseling to include these data points in their future activity. So we're very excited about what this is going to do for us, and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, David Young. Excuse me. So we know we've covered a lot of ground today, and there's some 3 key themes here in terms of 902 reporting, financial analysis versus budget, and CMSs and the way that we collect data. So I know we have a lot of questions coming in, and folks, please feel free to continue to pose your questions in the Q&A box. In the meantime, I wanted to circle back to some more information about the 902 data displays. We received some questions about at what level the data is available. So currently, the level is available at the aggregate, the national, and the state level, as we demonstrated. We do not have the ability at this time to drill down to the county level or to the agency level, but this is something that we're continuing to look at and work on with HUD. We will not be able to share data at the individual client counseled level due to protection of personally identifiable information. So at the most, we want to get as to a granular detail as possible to help you in benchmarking and knowing that geographically, there may be some areas where you're one of several agencies in your region, your state, your city, and in other areas, you may be the one and only. So we're paying close attention to that as we look about how we can further parse the data and break it down for you all so that it's useful and meaningful and accessible, while also retaining the ability to keep that client level data private. So I want to turn it back now to David Valdez and your presentation and some of the questions that have come in on financial analysis and budgets and implications for reporting. We know this is relatively new guidance with the HUD handbook update that was just published in April. So folks may be still reconciling this with what they've heard in the past, what they've seen come up for them in housing counseling performance reviews in terms of whether or not they're including budgets and not including budgets. So some of the questions that we've seen are around more examples of understanding what financial analysis really includes, if not a budget, and those times where what are the implications for reporting, and will agencies be penalized if they don't have a budget or if they're not reporting that outcome on their 9902s. As we know, in addition to actually doing that work in the client file, there is an outcome that's available that agencies can select to indicate that they reported a budget. So I'll turn it to you, David, to provide some more on financial analysis, budgets, and what folks need to know about the implications for including those and reporting and performance reviews.
Sure. I would say that the general rule is that one would have a budget, and that would be evidence that a financial and housing affordability analysis occurred. I think that's the key here, is that it's an analysis. And so in that analysis, in other parts of the handbook, in fact, we mentioned the fact that it's the counselor's responsibility to collect comprehensive information for analyzing that client's particular financial situation and that's to support their housing objectives or their problem or their goal, whatever it might be. And so I think as long as one is capturing the fact that, you know, you underwent as a counselor this analysis, and the outcome of your analysis was that in this circumstance, a budget was not necessary, and you could articulate that in writing in the client file why that was the case, I don't think you have anything to fear from a compliance perspective. That would be the thing that HUD is looking for upon performance review. You know, so again, the general rule is that we would probably see a budget. That's the most common outcome and common sense outcome of a financial and housing affordability analysis. But I think what we're doing here is just trying to recognize that there are situations where a budget is not going to be relevant or helpful in moving the client closer towards meeting their housing goal or solving their housing problem. And I'd like to add one thing that we didn't cover here, but it is related in the sense that, you know, certain activities, you know, we may be undercounting, because just like in the situation where we're talking about whether a budget or not is possible or necessary rather, we have sort of analogous situation in the action plan realm. And so what I want to focus in on here is appropriate for the circumstances. That is in fact the test that we're using. And you know, just because an action plan might be simple in some circumstances, it doesn't negate its validity. And so you can tick that box, if you will, that you created an action plan with the client, even if that client in most circumstances, you know, you would categorize them as someone who didn't quite reach the level of counseling. But if you can, you know, check all of the boxes of intake, financial and housing affordability analysis, action plan, and follow-up, you know, you're good. And I think much like follow-up, where there is a requirement to perform it, but it's also dependent upon how much the client wants to engage. How interested are they in engaging further? Just like you document already in the client files that you try to conduct follow-up and perhaps the client was not interested in anything further, you know, just like that, in that circumstance, an explanation would suffice. And so I just wanted to point that out as well. It's really similar.
Thanks, David. Yeah, this is, I know for obviously the clarity that's provided in the HUD handbook is something that not only the counseling agencies can follow going forward, but also will be applied in those performance reviews. So as we're beginning to understand what the implications of, you know, meeting the client where they are and doing what's appropriate for the circumstances, I'm sure agencies will have lots of conversations with their HUD POC about those examples that have come up. Do you have anything to offer further on other specific service types? So one of the questions that came in was about post-purchase. Are there any examples of post-purchase counseling where a budget might not be required? Or are there certain situations with certain service types like reverse mortgage counseling? How are you all going to be looking at what types of situations and examples where there isn't, where you might not expect to see a budget?
This is going to be fact dependent. I think, you know, the circumstance that presents itself, if one can reasonably articulate why a budget is not necessary in that circumstance, then that's okay. And though I've outlined, you know, rental and homelessness situations as two key examples, you know, I don't know off the top of my head whether something within the category of post-purchase was the example you gave would fit. Because the first thing I think about, you know, in post-purchase is not like, so there's non-delinquency post-purchase, and then and there's delinquency post-purchase counseling. And certainly in the delinquency realm, I would imagine that a budget is integral to helping that client achieve their housing goal, which is to avoid foreclosure. And so we would need the client in that circumstance, I think, to, you know, to have a budget. And that would be the way that you as a counselor would establish evidence that a financial and housing affordability analysis occurred. I think the main point here, though, is just that it's very fact specific, and the outcome is dependent on those specific facts. So it's a non-exhaustive list, as I noted before, mostly because we acknowledge that there might be instances that we're not thinking about that you as a counselor are presented with, and you can reasonably articulate why, for in this instance, a budget was not required.
Thanks, David. I think that the examples are helpful to illuminate, but yes, fact specific, depends on the situation, is the main takeaway for me here. One of the other questions on this topic, and then we'll see how it relates to the rest of the information that was shared today, is how HUD is working with client management systems to make sure that we're tracking or that the guidance that you've given around what's required is not or is it resonates and is aligned with what the client management systems are requiring. So one example is, if a client management system is trying to require you to enter a specific outcome or a pop-up that reminds you that you need to include a budget, how is HUD working with the client management systems to clarify and to exchange information on what the system should be tracking and how?
I think that's this is sort of the awesome part about this type of a conference, is that we get this type of information that we can then take back, and I can tell you that HUD's currently engaged in discourse in trying to figure out what some of the main reporting issues are. What are the limitations of client management systems? And we're working both with stakeholders, agencies, counselors, and most importantly, the CMS systems themselves. And I think this is a useful piece of information to present to them, that there may be instances where an if-then command that's built into the software requires, a certain action. What does someone do in that circumstance? I think there's probably an easy technological fix on that end, but it would require, us talking through it and presenting it as an issue. So again, thanks so much for bringing up this particular issue. I think that it's going to be, it'll be, I can guarantee that we'll talk about it and it'll be part of our discussions, but they're ongoing. And I think the larger goal is really just capturing as much information and data as we can, and ensuring that the integrity of that data is there. And so this is part of that overarching goal. And we'll continue talks with CMS vendors and ensure that these concerns are expressed, and hopefully we have some solutions for you in the future.
That's great. Thanks, David. Looking at the rest of the questions that are coming in, and folks can please feel free to submit questions. There's a lot of interest and curiosity about the implications of the new MISMO data set and what that might mean for better partnership with working with servicers and originators. And I know this is obviously something that's in the process of rolling out, but David Young, can you speak to a little bit more how you see this playing out in terms of agencies being able to submit information to originators, or servicers being able to reach back out to counseling agencies, and what, how that might practically play out, knowing that this is something that's in the process of being developed, the data set is in the process of being incorporated, and the MISMO process is ongoing.
Sure, Lindsay, thank you. So with this data set, and especially the additional data elements that we're looking to add, what we are creating is the foundation for which there will be a lot of products that can be developed. Some of the things that will come out of that, or some of the products that will come out of that, will include that our CMS developers will look to incorporate the data elements from MISMO into future versions of client management systems. So we will all have access to that through our systems. It is something that the Office of Housing Counseling is going to look at and can look to assess how to add those data elements to the next generation of technology for the Office of Housing Counseling. But I think where the biggest value will be is that as more and more people understand that all of these systems are speaking the same language, that more people are going to want to find ways to utilize it. And so that's going to mean that originators are going to start thinking about, well, if we're all speaking the same language, what pieces do we need to put in place? What APIs do we need to develop? What other software tools do we need to put in place in order to facilitate this? And the same thing will happen on the servicing side. And what is very exciting about this is that it's actually a two-way street. So it's not just that an originator will come and say, we've created something, but it is our housing counseling organizations and working either with or alongside CMS developers will say, hey, we have ideas on what can happen and how this can benefit an originator, and we'll be able to pitch those ideas as well. So the fact that we are all speaking the same language going forward is going to really help to open creativity and expand the options for new products and services that will benefit us all.
Thanks, David. I know folks are curious also about how they can stay up to date on what's the latest in our progress with the MISMO data set and integration. Any guidance on that? I know you are our go-to guru.
Yes, I often joke, because I've been working on this for the last 7 years. I often joke that I have 2 children. I have a 6-year-old son and a 7-year-old data set. I regularly report back about our MISMO work through the National Housing Resource Center, especially their leaders' calls on Thursdays, so tune in for those. We also have our Housing Counseling Development Work Group that meets twice a month, the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays of every month. And housing counselors are encouraged to participate there because as we are, for example, reviewing data elements and making decisions about what's going to happen in the future, we want to make sure that we have practitioners that are doing this work every day, telling us that we are on the right path, that we are including the things that people want to know. So those are a couple of ways. We also will have the upcoming Coalition of HUD Intermediaries conference, and I'll be reporting there and probably reporting again next year when NHRC has its conference. So, and people are free to reach out to me via email, and I'm happy to provide updates.
Thank you, David. It's very exciting to see the way things have progressed. We know technology both moves fast and slow and tends to throw us all off the track. So having folks like yourself who have stayed on top of this for the last 7 years is why we're able to get to where we are today. I think that's incredible. And the partnership, we know this is something HUD is behind and is working to support as well. David Valdez, is there anything you want to say about the MISMO data set and future implications and what HUD's looking at with regard to the data we do collect and how agencies are using it?
Not specifically, as it relates to MISMO, but I do think, earlier you brought up client level data and the need to respect privacy and the like, and while that's certainly the case, I think it's important to mention that there's an obligation to provide client level data. And I think that currently we have a compliance rate sitting around 60% of folks who are submitting such data. So, I think just I want to use this opportunity to speak directly to you as practitioners and the users of these CMS systems. Please, make sure that you're transmitting that client level data, because though we might not be able to share it openly, we're able to use that data internally to tell a bit of to tell a better story and to better understand exactly who it is we're reaching, we're not reaching, impacting, et cetera. So please, as you submit your 9902 data, please make sure that you're also submitting that client level data to HUD.
Where do you recommend agencies go as their first point of contact if they're having any issues with submitting that client level data?
I would say that they should be reaching out to the vendor themselves of the CMS to figure out, is there some user error? Can they work together to, figure out what the issue is? And beyond that, I think, there's really not much, truthfully, that we can do on the HUD side, because the relationship is existing between the CMS providers and the respective counseling agencies. And so I would say, consult with your CMS vendor, and try to get answers and figure out what exactly the issue is, troubleshoot. And I'm sure that you can come to some resolution, because it is a requirement and we have specific standards that CMS vendors must meet. And in fact, they're tested before that they're able to go online, and made available to the public. And one of those features is the ability to transmit that client level data. So please reach out to your vendor and ask them to help you if you're having difficulty in submitting that kind of data. I suspect too, it might not be so much of a technical issue as much as it seems sort of just sort of extraneous to the process of submitting the 9902 itself, which truthfully is, the most important part of it. But I do just want folks to think about how important it is to HUD to receive both sets of data, and so that we can tell that full story of how counseling is helping clients across the United States.
Thanks, David. I know it's an area of future technical assistance as well that we continue to work on. In addition to the data displays that I showed you all earlier on the HUD Exchange, we have a 9902 reporting guide and some additional information on CMS and HCS data transmission. We're continuing to work on that as well, and through HUD, opening those dialogues with the various prominent CMS vendors to align on what agencies need in terms of support. So we are getting close to the end of our time together, and I'm sure there are questions we weren't able to answer. And I want to thank each of our speakers today, Linda, David Young, and David Valdez. There have been a lot of requests for more links and information on resources, how folks can learn about MISMO and stay up to date on what's happening with data and get more guidance on the reporting requirements when it comes to financial analysis and budget. So you'll be able to find this resources page in the slide deck in CVent. We have some links here to the handbook itself, the 902 toolkit, as well as Housing Action Illinois' guide to the HUD-approved client management systems, and a video with some more background on MISMO and how those standards will help empower housing counselors and homeowners. We'll be sure to share more information through CVent about other ways to stay up to date on what's going on with the latest and greatest in housing counseling, data, and technology. So thank you all again for attending today's session. We have 3 more sessions available for you today. Our next sessions are concurrent sessions beginning at 1:30 on the availability of affordable housing, a journey across the US and through innovative policies, as well as making connections, where we'll share highlights from the OHC regional meetings. And please do join us at 3 o'clock for our closing with OHC leadership, where we'll reflect on the last few days of the conference, and you'll be able to hear from our leadership at OHC on what they're taking away and what they're going to be thinking about as they return to their offices and digest everything we've covered the last few days. So thanks again for attending. Please go back to CVent to see what resources we have available there. And after the conference, you can always find us at these locations through these channels, through our conference webpage and the HUD Exchange, and through housing counseling at HUD.gov and our Housing Counseling Today blog. Thanks, everyone. We'll look forward to seeing you in our later sessions today. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.